Hey guys, Thomas Jr. here, aka Mustache Tom, here to review the movie The Grudge 2020 remake. Alright, if you end up enjoying this review, then consider joining the second link that will head you over to my Patreon. Any donations are desperately needed. Side note, before we officially begin, I would like to readdress that the reason why this review is a little late is because I was still trying to mess with the lighting situation that I had from the previous review. I've yet to figure out why the light has dimmed on my recordings. I'm gonna just assume for the time being that all future recordings that I do will be with this dimmer light because I can't figure out how to bring back the lighter part, how to brighten it. I've tried messing around with OBS a lot in the few days, but to no avail. If I had Patreon supporters, I'd probably get either a new laptop or something else to record with, just so I can have that peace of mind. But I don't have any Patreon supporters, again, so please feel free to join my Patreon. Any donations desperately needed. With that, I'll head into the review of The Grudge 2020 remake, which is a remake of the 2004, I believe it came out in, version of The Grudge, which is an adaptation of Ju Huan. I believe that's the pronunciation. So this is a remake of a movie that was an adaptation in 2004, just so that we're clear. So in this version of The Grudge, we start in Tokyo in 2004 with a woman named Yoko. Her phone dies as she's in her house, and as she's leaving to return to her home, we see a bag moving, and we see that the Grudge has already afflicted her with hand-grabbing movements and all. We cut to Pennsylvania, and we cut to a husband, a mother, and a daughter. And we skip to 2006, so there's already time shifts involved in this. Where the mother and the child are there, and the dad is off working. And we cut to one of our main characters, I think. The police officer, I believe her name was Maldone, but I'll call her Mal for short. So she comes on across this crime scene of a car that is hitting a tree, and she sees that the body is really distorted and really bad looking. So she's looking into what could have caused this. Comes into the conclusion that it came from the same location of something else. So she's putting things together, and that it came from a place called Rayburn, or whatever it was called. But as she's approaching the house, she gets there, she hears a woman weeping inside. The woman goes crazy, weeping and screaming for help, and Mal goes to call for help. So she goes to her detective buddy, who see if she can clear some things up, and tells him what she did. So while they're talking, they talk about who they lost along the way, just to give them a little bit of a little thing. We cut back, though, to 2004, where in the hospital we see the woman, the daughter, and the husband again. And we see him heading back to his home. He is like some sort of real estate agent. His name is Peter. And he's going to the car, he takes a shower, and then he feels the hands above him, which is the thing you see on the poster there. Hears light noises in the night, and traveling, and more noises. And we see that he's trying to talk to this little girl who is bleeding from the nose. I'm just gonna say now she's apparently a grudge girl or something. Um, and that is already sort of the issue of this, is that the look of the people who become possessed by the grudge just sort of look like people that, have effects added to them later on, such as the nosebleed or something else that isn't necessarily indicative of the grudge. So we also are introduced to, I believe Sam is the father of the girl, and then Mal, who is going to clean up, and is pushed down by something. Anyways, we cut to 2005, so the in-between period. We meet this old man who wants his wife to pass on peacefully, so that their body can stay or whatever it was, something like that. And the old woman, whose name I wrote later on, Masterson, I think it is, who has this invisible friend that she is talking to. And Mal's there trying to figure things out. And the person who's helping the old man and Masterson pass on is deciding that she wants to. I just called her the Helper in my notes, or the Death Reaper, or something. I don't know what they would be called. And anyways, she's given a room. We see that the girl appears and poofs, so we know that she has grudge powers, but she does not look like a grudge character. And we see Mal sort of, doing her thing a little bit, seeing another man stand there very briefly. And then we see a officer outside of their building looking in and just standing there menacingly. And the old man calls in to have him picked up. And while he's picked up by the other detective, the one that was with Mal, the guy shoots himself as they're in the car, which is what they were talking about. And so having them having to talk about it and show it is a little bit, discombobulating, to say the least. Anyway, Mal talks about this other officer and what his deal was. So she's at home, and then she has a moment where the dog is licking her foot or whatever, and then she's chilling. She puts the paper back down and sees that the dog is coming in. So something licked her. That wasn't the dog before. So she goes to the ward, and goes to this other officer named Wilson, and he's warning her about the grudge. So she heads back and listens to his tapes, and they mention Ju-on, so they know what it is. They know what the original movie is called, because they actually mention it in this movie. Anyways, the detective checks in with them, and they head out, the two of them, to the cafe, and she's freaking out a little bit too. So she, after cleaning up once more, she hears a bang in one of the restrooms, so she rushes into the recording room to see what was going on, sees some boogly-wooglies, and gets this other officer that was in there with them to see it. When she replays the tape, however, it does not show anything happening. So she thinks she's going nuts. She brings her son over to the detective, and she looks up the person who owned the house. And it shows her smoking several times throughout the movie in her little flashbacks and lights it up. Heads out, her phone rings, and we cut back to Peter being at the house with the little girl. His wife calls. The door rings and he checks in on it, and we see that the girl has moved locations once again. He's looking around in the restroom. He's grabbed from behind and he's plummeted. Meanwhile, we see that he's being called by some woman named Nina. The wife heads out of wherever looking for Peter, and he goes after her all right. And we get a cut of blood and bloodiness all over. Anyway, back to the old man and the death person, who's like with Masterson still. She's checking with Masterson, and appears. She says after seeing something that the house is clearly haunted. And he even knows this and explains what he believes are to be the rules of the afterlife, like as if he knows it all. Based on what he said, I think he was completely wrong, I think. Anyway, she looks for Masterson again in the morning, only to find out the old man is dead and that the Masterson lady is like claiming she killed him. So, the death lady runs off, drives off, and sees a ghost in the back of her car, crashes the car. We cut back to Mal, the detective, at the hospital, with Madison heading up to the roof, or Masterson. So she drops down dead. And the detective calls Mal after such incidents have occurred. She's looking around slowly. She turns off her lights with gun in hand. She sees the Grudge very briefly, and moves back. She checks with her son for like another little fake out happening. So she comes together, or she calls in the detective to say like, hey, I'm gonna go check out the house and stuff. So she brings her son with him, tells him to stay in the car, and she's had enough of this nonsense, so she oils up the house, seeing the events as they played out of order. And the last thing she sees is her son in the house, who doesn't answer one of the things that they set up in the beginning, which is like, she would always say, or she would say at the beginning, count to whatever, I think it was like 5, with your eyes closed, and then see what hop-ons when you open your eyes. He did not do it, so that alone convinced her that that was not her son. She throws the lighter, it happens to be the Grudge indeed. She drives off. Back home, where she hugs her son, as it's another day getting ready for school, but then hears her son in the background, and then screaming ensues, and that was The Grudge 2020. And one of the major issues with this movie, immediately, is that there are too many characters and too many flashing forwards and flashing backs. I feel like The Grudge is a more, from what I can remember of the Grudge, the 2004 one at least, it was very centralized, and even in Ju-hwan, I believe, it was just one woman seeing the stuff over and over again. Um, and that was that. Again, very centralized, and I think that would definitely help this movie. You could easily cut the old man, Masterson, and the Death Lady all together, all from this movie, and lose absolutely nothing because they contribute so little um, to the actual story that they could have potentially told instead. I think they could have easily focused in on Masterson as the character, as the investigator, take on that approach to it, um, and just have the entire story be about her and the detective. That's it. That's the only two characters you really needed to focus in this movie. Um, Other than that, the other obviously problem that I brought up is that the Grudge has a very iconic look to it. It is a very the family that is possessed has a very pale complexion to them, and I'm talking about like pale white. And the people who end up becoming possessed do not appear that way. And I think that actually does take away from The Grudge. And the other thing about The Grudge, other than its complexion being very obvious and very distinct, is that it moves in a very specific sort of way. When it is, when you see it, it it definitely moves very shiftily and does the upside down crab walk, I would describe it as. Sometimes it goes on the roof. And it's very often very, very slow. I believe she does have the ability to teleport, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it definitely has a very distinct feeling to it. The Grudge creature does, or the Grudge unit, I should say, I suppose. They all have a very distinctive look, a very distinctive feel, a very distinctive set of rules that are abided by in both Ju-hwan and the original Grudge, but not in this version of the Grudge, which I believe takes a tremendous amount of way. You could have called this movie Possession Ghost House. Ghost House. I don't know. Like something very generic, and you would lose absolutely nothing by doing so. Because honestly, taking on the name The Grudge, since it's already going to be a reboot anyway, less people are going to be fascinated by another reboot, because that has been typically the trend is that reboots tend to not be as successful as the originals, and this is no exception to that. On top of that, again, this is not even, again, the 2004 version isn't even the original. It is, again, that is an adaptation of Ju-hwan, which I believe is the Japanese version is the best version if you're wanting to get into this series. But I do believe that the original Grudge kept the essence of the Grudge alive. It kept the look alive. It kept certain elements alive to sell that point of what the Grudge is, and this version simply does not. On top of the character, with too many characters, and them not given enough time to develop, you're always sort of moving about. There's just so many flaws with this on a basic level, and if you are a fan of The Grudge, that only detracts more. So I'm going to go ahead and score this movie. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 1 out of 10. There is barely anything that this movie does right. Maybe the one visual when they're in the restroom, or in the bathroom, the one on the poster here. You see the white hands, which again, very Grudge-like, so that is the closest it actually does get, so. But other than that, there's not really any other element that I could say actually works in this movie. The characters are barely established. The rules are just not even, it doesn't even feel like it's properly set. Everything is just out of whack. So that's my review of The Grudge, and if you did enjoy this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are desperately needed, and until next time, everyone, bye-bye.